Well, we're back right now with Nona Jones, and she's an executive at the largest social media platform in the world. Along with that, she's an author, a teacher, pastor, you name it. And seems like she has just about done it. And what would you do if you had to compare yourself to Nona? Well, Nona, give us some advice. Why, you were just talking about that, why we need to be secure in who we are. I can't compare myself to you, but tell me why.
Well, I want to go a little bit deeper. So I mentioned before the break Jeremiah chapter 1 and 5, and I think we often read that verse with a level of familiarity that actually lessens its poignancy. So if you read it slowly, it says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." What that means there, if you really slow down, is that again, not life began at conception. You actually had an identity before conception. And so many of us, we're being born an original, but we're dying a duplicate because throughout our life, we're seeing other people as our competitors. We're seeing other people as the benchmark for success. And I think what it's doing is it's making many of us actually shrink our purpose down so that we're fitting inside of the small box of other people's opinions of us.
Mm.
I do believe that what God intends for every single one of us is so powerful, it's so purposeful that He decided we were necessary for creation. God doesn't make extras and He doesn't make duplicates. And so for me, I think the reason why we have to understand that is that the cemetery is the richest place on earth because many of us are actually dying with incredible amounts of potential on the inside of us that's never been realized
Mm.
because of comparison.
So, Nona, let's press into that. You're saying we don't want to make other people the benchmark. So help me to understand, what is the benchmark for myself, for viewers at home who are saying, yeah, you know what, I do struggle with comparison. I don't want to look at other people. I'm created by God. And as you're saying, God creates everybody unique. How do I enjoy that uniqueness that God has given to me? And how do I live in a way that grabs onto that and steps into that uniqueness?
So throughout the book, throughout Killing Comparison, there is a thread of a story, a Bible story. And I want to just give it a little bit of airtime now because I think it answers your question. So most people know about the dysfunctional relationship between King Saul and David, right? Like we know King Saul was jealous of David because David, he got the approval of the people. Now, David started off as, just this like young shepherd boy who killed Goliath. Saul enlisted him in his army, and David became a mighty warrior, so much so that one time King Saul and David were returning to town, and the people were singing, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." And it was in that moment that the Bible says that Saul actually became jealous of David. Now, the reason why I bring this up is there's actually a third person in that story who doesn't get talked about enough, and his name is Jonathan. He's Saul's son. Many people know that Jonathan was David's best friend, but what you don't know is if you go over to 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 31, whereas we've been told the headline of that story is the dysfunction between Saul and David, that Saul saw David as a threat to his kingdom. Saul says to Jonathan, Jonathan was defending David because Saul wanted to kill him. Saul says to Jonathan, "Do you not know that as long as David lives, neither you nor your kingdom will be established?" In
Mm.
other words, Saul was telling Jonathan, David's not a threat to me. He's a threat to you. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because if you know Jonathan, and I really encourage you to study Jonathan, way back when he's first introduced to us, 1 Samuel chapter 14 and 6, he makes an interesting statement. He goes to fight a group of Philistines by himself. And he says, "Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." I believe that is the fundamental truth that we have to secure our identity to. You are not in competition with anybody else because as long as God is for you, no one can oppose you. And if you understand that, you will never see the need for comparison ever again.
If I could add my 2 cents into that, it's something we have to work at continually. Because just when I feel I've got it whipped, it sneaks back up and it bites me. I'll just confess, I really had to struggle for a period of a couple years with a person that I had once hired who went out on his own and was far more successful at least as the world looked at, than I ever was. And that was a hard one. And I finally had to put him on my prayer list to pray for blessing on his life. And it was hard for me to pray sincerely, but then there was a breakthrough. And that was an interesting place where I could rejoice in what he was doing and be excited. I would love for you just to take a few minutes and talk to our viewers about what are some of the safeguards we can put into place with social media. I mean, at different times we've heard different things, but love to hear it from you. What do we need to put into place, especially so that we guard our heart?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, and I talk about this in the book, we have to guard our eyes in order to guard our heart. Sometimes insecurity is triggered because the things that we're keeping before our eyes are communicating to us that we're not good enough, that we don't measure up, that we're somehow deficient, we've somehow been left out, we've been overlooked. And so I think one of the tools that we can use, which I think everybody should use liberally, is unfollow. If there's someone that you're following and every time they're making a post about how perfect their family is, how perfect their life is, which let's be real, perfection is fiction. There's no such thing as perfection. But you start to feel like, man, my marriage sucks because theirs is amazing. Or wow, my career is horrible because theirs is thriving. Unfollow. You can even mute them, which means you don't unfollow them, but you don't see their posts. Guard your eyes to guard your heart. And I would also say do that in real life. Sometimes in real life, there are people that you don't need to spend a lot of time with because they're constantly talking about the highlight reel of their life. And it just makes you feel worse and worse about yours.
Well, that's good. So, Mitch, you need to unfollow me. That's be one of my takeaways.
I'll put you on mute. You'll think
You'll
I'm
put-
following you.
yeah.
You'll be muted.
And defriend me or whatever it is. So, Nona, it's just been a privilege chatting with you today. And Killing Comparisons can be found on Amazon.com. And why do people need to read it? Tell us that from your perspective.
Yeah, I think many of us have believed so many lies about our worthiness. And listen, I've read a lot of great books about insecurity. I've read really good books written by really thoughtful authors. But you know what? I didn't experience freedom. And that's why I wrote my book, because there is a roadmap to get free for real from comparison born insecurity. So if you're struggling with this, if you're wrestling with this is an area of life where you want to get victory. Killing Comparison will provide that to you so you can live confident in who God has created you to be.
Great summary. Nona Jones, thank you so much for being with us. We encourage you to get her book, Killing Comparisons. You can find it at your local bookstore or on Amazon.com.